I never thought I'd end up sharing my story here, but I need to get it out of my system. Maybe it'll help me make sense of the chaos my life has become. My name's Jason, and for the past 10 years, I've been married to Rachel. We met in college, fell in love, and I genuinely believed we were one of those couples who could weather any storm. But I was wrong, terribly wrong. A few months ago, things started to change. At first, I didn't notice anything significant. Rachel had recently taken a new job at a marketing agency, which meant longer hours and more stress. I tried to be supportive, even when it felt like she was slipping away from me. She'd always been driven, and I admired that about her. But something was different this time. It began with her talking more about her coworker, Mike. And yeah, I know how cliché this sounds. Mike is my cousin. We grew up together, though we were never particularly close. He's the charming type, good-looking, funny, and always had a way of making people like him. I had no reason to suspect anything at first. Why would I? They were coworkers, and it made sense for them to spend time together during the day. But as time went on, their work relationship started to feel off. Rachel would come home and talk about him constantly. Mike came up with the funniest idea during the meeting today. She'd say, or, Mike thinks I should pitch this project differently. At first, I chalked it up to office camaraderie. Maybe she felt more comfortable with him because of our family connection. I didn't want to be one of those paranoid, overbearing husbands who made a big deal out of nothing. Then came the late nights. She started staying at the office longer than usual, claiming she was buried in deadlines. I didn't question it. After all, I've always trusted her. But there was something about the way she'd get defensive when I asked about her day. She stopped sharing the little things, and her phone became glued to her hand. The password was changed, and she started taking it with her even when she went to the bathroom. I brushed off my suspicions. Maybe she really was just stressed. Maybe I was overthinking things. But then I started noticing little things. She was dressing differently, tighter skirts, lower necklines. She'd always been beautiful, but she was putting in an effort that didn't seem like it was for me. When I mentioned it, she brushed me off, laughing and saying she wanted to feel confident at work. But confidence didn't explain the way she'd pull away when I tried to hug her, or how she'd flinch if I reached for her phone, or why she'd suddenly become irritated with everything I did, from the way I folded the laundry to the way I chewed my food. It felt like she was looking for reasons to push me away. I should have trusted my gut then, but I didn't. I wanted to believe in her, in us. So I ignored the red flags and convinced myself it was all in my head. That was my first mistake. Things escalated when Rachel started spending weekends at work events. She claimed they were mandatory, but they always seemed to pop up out of nowhere. She stopped inviting me to company gatherings, saying they were just for employees. I started feeling like an outsider in her life, but whenever I tried to talk about it, she'd accuse me of being controlling or insecure. "You're imagining things, Jason," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "Mike's just a friend. Don't make this weird." But it was weird, and I wasn't imagining it. I'd always been the kind of guy who avoided conflict, who believed in giving people space. But Rachel's behavior was pushing me to my limit. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on, something she wasn't telling me. And no matter how much I wanted to believe otherwise, I couldn't ignore the growing knot in my stomach every time she mentioned Mike's name. The final straw came one Friday evening. Rachel had said she'd be late, that she and Mike were working on a big pitch for a client. I didn't think much of it until I checked her location on our shared app, something I hadn't done in months. She wasn't at the office. She was at a bar downtown. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Why would she lie about where she was? And why the hell was she with Mike? That's when it hit me. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. Something was going on, and I needed to find out what. But the question was, did I really want to know the truth? After that Friday evening, I couldn't get the image out of my head. Rachel and Mike at the bar, laughing, sharing drinks, maybe more. My mind spiraled into every worst-case scenario, but I still didn't have proof of anything. And as much as I hated myself for it, I started obsessing over the idea of catching them in the act. Rachel's behavior only fueled my paranoia. She'd become distant, cold even. The warmth and playfulness we once shared were gone, replaced by short, clipped conversations and a constant tension I couldn't shake. I'd always been the laid-back one in our relationship, the guy who rolled with the punches and didn't let small things bother him. But now I was on edge all the time, second-guessing everything she said and did. The following Monday, I decided to test her. "How was the pitch with Mike?" I asked casually as we sat at the dinner table. She froze for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. "Oh, it went fine," she said, too quickly. "The client loved it." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but inside, my suspicions grew. I couldn't prove she was lying, but I felt it in my gut. Something was off. That week, I started paying closer attention to her routine. Rachel had always been predictable. Up at 6:30, gym by 7 o'clock, work by 9 o'clock. But now, her schedule seemed to shift daily. She'd leave earlier than usual some days and come home later than expected others. And every time I asked where she'd been, her answers were vague. "Just running errands," she'd say, or, "I grabbed coffee with a coworker." Always casual, always dismissive. But the more I pushed, the more defensive she became. "You're being ridiculous, Jason," she snapped one evening when I questioned her about a late-night meeting. "I told you, it's for work. You need to stop acting like a jealous teenager." Her words stung, but they didn't deter me. If anything, they only made me more determined to uncover the truth. The turning point came when I found her phone on the kitchen counter one night. She'd gone to shower, leaving it unattended, something she never did anymore. My hands trembled as I picked it up, debating whether to look. I knew it was an invasion of her privacy, but at that moment, I didn't care. I had to know, but the phone was locked, and the password wasn't the same as it used to be. That was the confirmation I didn't want but desperately needed. Rachel had always been open with her phone, even encouraging me to use it if mine was dead. The fact that she'd changed the password without telling me spoke volumes. I felt sick to my stomach, but I knew I couldn't confront her, not yet. If she was lying to me, she'd only deny it. I needed real proof, something she couldn't explain away or twist into an argument about my supposed insecurities. That's when I decided to follow her. The idea made me feel dirty, like some kind of stalker. But I couldn't shake the image of her and Mike at the bar, laughing over drinks while I sat at home like an idiot. I had to know what was really going on, even if it destroyed me. The next morning, I waited until she left for work, then grabbed my car keys and followed her. I kept a safe distance, making sure she wouldn't spot me. My heart pounded as I tailed her through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, then onto the freeway. But instead of heading straight to her office like she usually did, she took a different route. My stomach dropped as I realized she wasn't going to work at all. She pulled into a parking lot near a small coffee shop, and I parked a block away, watching from a distance. A few minutes later, Mike's car pulled in beside hers. He got out, smiling, and leaned into her window to say something before she stepped out. They hugged, too long, too intimately. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles white. This wasn't just a friendly coworker hug. This was something else. They went into the coffee shop together, and I sat there, seething. I wanted to storm in, to confront them right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. If I lost my temper, I'd give Rachel the perfect excuse to paint me as the bad guy. No, I needed to wait, to follow them and see where this was going. They stayed in the coffee shop for about half an hour, then came back out, laughing and joking like teenagers. Mike opened the car door for her, and she slid inside with a smile that I hadn't seen in months, not directed at me, anyway. I followed them again, keeping my distance, my heart pounding harder with every turn they took. When they pulled into the parking lot of a motel on the edge of town, my worst fears were confirmed. They were having an affair. I watched as they disappeared inside, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to think. Part of me wanted to burst through those doors and drag them both out into the open. But I didn't. Instead, I drove home, my mind racing with what I'd just seen. The Rachel I knew, my Rachel, would never have done this to me. Or so I'd thought, but now, I didn't even recognize her. And as much as I hated Mike for betraying me, it was Rachel's betrayal that cut the deepest. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but one thing was clear. My marriage was falling apart, and I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the scene outside the motel. Rachel's smile as she walked inside with Mike, their easy laughter, the way she looked at him. It felt like my entire world was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed to confront her, but I didn't want to go into it empty-handed. I wanted her to see the undeniable truth of what she was doing, what they were doing. So I planned to follow her again, hoping to catch them in the act. Rachel's behavior was textbook guilty. That morning, she was unusually cheerful, humming to herself as she got ready for work. I forced a smile, pretending everything was normal, though my stomach churned at the sight of her. How could she act so innocent, so happy, when she was stabbing me in the back? As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys and followed her. The drive felt like a repeat of the day before, but this time, I was prepared for what I might find. She didn't go to the office again. Instead, she met Mike at the same coffee shop, and from there, they headed straight to the motel. I parked my car a few spaces away, watching as they went inside. My heart raced, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But another part of me, a darker, angrier part, wanted to see it through. I needed closure, no matter how painful it might be. I waited about 15 minutes before stepping out of the car. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the motel. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Burst in and scream at them. Take pictures as evidence, or just stand there, silently shattering inside. The receptionist barely looked up as I walked past the front desk. The place reeked of cheap perfume and bad decisions. My stomach turned as I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, searching for their room. I didn't even know the number, but luck, or cruel fate, was on my side. As I passed one of the doors, I heard her laugh. That laugh, the one she used to reserve for me. My blood boiled. Without thinking, I grabbed the door handle and twisted. It was locked, of course, but the sound of me trying startled them. I heard movement inside, hurried and frantic, as though they were scrambling to cover their tracks. "Who's there?" Rachel's voice called, tinged with panic. "It's me," I said, my voice low and steady, though my insides were anything but. There was a pause, and then the door cracked open. Rachel stood there, wearing nothing but a hastily thrown-on robe. Her face went pale when she saw me. Behind her, Mike was sitting on the bed, shirtless and looking just as shocked. "Jason, what are you doing here?" she stammered, trying to sound indignant, as though I were the one out of line. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What the hell do you think I'm doing here, Rachel? I followed you. I've been following you, and now I know." Her expression hardened, the panic giving way to something colder. "You've been following me? Are you serious? Do you even hear how crazy that sounds? Don't you dare try to turn this on me," I snapped, stepping inside the room. "You're the one sneaking around. Meeting him?" I pointed at Mike, who had the decency to look ashamed, in a motel, of all places. She crossed her arms, her robe slipping slightly to reveal more than I wanted to see. "Maybe if you'd been paying more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed to." I stared at her, stunned. "You're blaming me for this? For your affair? Are you kidding me right now?" Mike cleared his throat, trying to speak. "Jason, man, don't you dare talk to me," I hissed, cutting him off. "You're supposed to be my family, my blood, and this is how you repay me?" He looked away, his shoulders slumping. I didn't mean for this to happen. Save it, I said. You meant for every bit of this to happen. I turned back to Rachel, who was watching me with a mixture of defiance and disdain. Do you even feel bad about this? At all? She shrugged. I feel bad that you found out like this. But if I'm being honest, Jason, I haven't been happy in a long time. You've been so distant, so wrapped up in your own little world. I needed someone who actually made me feel alive. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. So this is my fault? You cheated because I wasn't enough for you? Maybe you should look in the mirror, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. Mike understands me in a way you never could. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted with my life, was standing in front of me, tearing me down while she stood in a motel room with my cousin. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice shaking. Do you even realize what you've done? To me? To us? She rolled her eyes. Spare me the pity party, Jason. We both know this marriage was over long before Mike came into the picture. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process everything she'd said. But there was nothing left to say. No excuse, no apology would ever fix this. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her and Mike behind. My heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest, but one thing was clear. This was the end. And there was no going back. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the streets I took or the stoplights I ran. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my mind replayed the scene in that motel room over and over again. Rachel's defiance, Mike's pathetic attempts to justify himself, the way they had looked at me, like I was the intruder in their little fantasy world. When I finally got home, I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing through the empty house. This place, once filled with laughter and love, now felt cold and hollow. I slumped onto the couch, my head in my hands, as the full weight of what had happened crashed down on me. My wife, my partner of 10 years, had betrayed me. And not just with anyone, but with my own cousin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But all I could do was sit there, numb and exhausted, wondering how it had come to this. Rachel came home later that night, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor as she walked into the living room. She didn't look ashamed or even guilty. If anything, she looked annoyed, like I was the problem. We need to talk, she said, crossing her arms and standing over me. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Oh, now you want to talk? After everything? She sighed, exasperated. I'm not going to apologize for finding happiness, Jason. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. Happiness? You think screwing around with my cousin in a motel is happiness? She rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. I didn't plan for this to happen, okay? It just did. And maybe if you weren't so boring all the time, I wouldn't have felt the need to look elsewhere. Boring, I repeated, my voice hollow. That's what you think of me. After everything I've done for you. Don't act like you're some kind of saint, she snapped. You've been emotionally absent for years, Jason. I've been carrying this marriage on my own, and I'm tired of it. Emotionally absent? I said, standing up to face her. Do you even hear yourself? I've been here, Rachel. Every single day. I've supported you, loved you, given you everything I had. And this is how you repay me? She didn't flinch. Maybe I wouldn't have had to repay you if you'd been the husband I needed. I stared at her, stunned. She wasn't sorry, not even a little bit. In her mind, this was all my fault. She was twisting everything, rewriting our history to make herself the victim and me the villain. And what about Mike? I asked, my voice shaking. Is he the husband you've always needed? Is that what you're telling me? Rachel hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. Mike makes me feel alive. He makes me feel seen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had the gall to stand there and justify her affair, to blame me for her betrayal, and to act like she was the one who'd been wronged. It was like I didn't even know her anymore. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice breaking. Do you even care about what you've done? About what this means for us? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked into the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water like we were having a normal conversation. Look, Jason, she said, her tone suddenly calm and patronizing. I think it's time we both admit that this marriage isn't working. We've been drifting apart for years, and honestly, maybe this is for the best. For the best, I repeated, laughing bitterly. You destroy our marriage, and now you're acting like this is some kind of amicable breakup? She shrugged, sipping her water. We can either fight about it, or we can move on like adults. Move on? I said, my anger boiling over. You've already moved on, haven't you? You've been planning this, haven't you? Trying to make me look like the bad guy so you can run off with him. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. That's it, I said, grabbing my keys. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice tinged with annoyance rather than concern. Anywhere but here, I said, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my head. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it was too much. I didn't know what to do or where to go, but I couldn't stay in that house with her. Not anymore. Eventually, I ended up at my best friend Mark's place. He opened the door, saw the look on my face, and didn't ask any questions. He just let me in, handed me a beer, and listened as I poured out the whole story. Jesus, man, he said when I finished. I don't even know what to say. That's brutal. I nodded, staring at the floor. I don't know what to do, Mark. I don't know how to move on from this. You don't have to figure it out right now, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. But one thing's for sure, you deserve better than her. His words were comforting, but they didn't erase the pain. I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. My marriage was over, my trust shattered, and my life in ruins. And the worst part was, Rachel didn't even care. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. If she wanted to move on, then so be it. But I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about taking back control of my life. The divorce papers were served later that week. Rachel didn't even seem surprised. If anything, she looked relieved. And that hurt more than anything else. But as I walked out of that house for the last time, I realized something. I deserved better. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find it. Serving Rachel the divorce papers felt like closing a chapter of my life that had been dragging on far too long. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tears, no regret. She took the papers, skimmed them, and nodded like we were signing off on a routine contract. Her nonchalance stung, but it also gave me clarity. I had made the right decision. The divorce process moved quickly, mostly because Rachel didn't contest anything. She didn't care about the house, the shared savings, or even the dog we'd adopted together. She wanted out, plain and simple. I could only assume it was because she had Mike to fall back on. Mike didn't reach out to me, and honestly, I was glad. I didn't want to hear his excuses or apologies. Family or not, he'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He and Rachel deserved each other, and I wanted nothing more to do with either of them. The day it all came to a head. The final court date for our divorce was a surreal experience. Rachel showed up looking polished and professional, as if she were attending a business meeting rather than the end of a decade-long marriage. I couldn't help but wonder if she felt even a shred of remorse. If she did, she hid it well. As the judge finalized the paperwork, I glanced over at her. She was calm, detached, and completely unbothered. Meanwhile, I was struggling to keep my emotions in check. This woman had once been my everything, my best friend, my partner, my future. Now, she was a stranger. The moment the judge declared our marriage dissolved, Rachel stood up, nodded politely, and left the courtroom without a word. That was it. 10 years of love, trust, and commitment reduced to a few signatures and an awkward silence. I sat there for a while after she left, letting the finality of it all sink in. It was over, truly over, and while part of me still felt the sting of betrayal, another part felt free. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I could breathe again. Life after Rachel. The weeks after the divorce were a blur of adjustment. I moved out of the house we'd shared and into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. Hitting the gym, reconnecting with friends, and even picking up old hobbies I'd long abandoned. Surprisingly, I found that life without Rachel wasn't as bleak as I'd feared. In fact, it was liberating. No more walking on eggshells, no more late-night arguments, no more pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I was finally free to be myself, without the constant weight of her judgment and resentment. And as for Mike and Rachel, well, their little love story didn't last long. A mutual friend told me they'd broken up less than 2 months after the divorce was finalized. Apparently, Rachel wasn't thrilled when she realized that Mike wasn't the perfect Prince Charming she'd built him up to be. And Mike, he'd lost not only me but also the respect of our family, who'd sided with me after learning what had happened. It was poetic justice, in a way. They'd destroyed everything for a relationship that couldn't even withstand the weight of its own lies. Reflections on the past. Looking back, I can see now that my marriage to Rachel had been crumbling long before the affair. We'd both made mistakes, both failed to communicate, and both let resentment build up over time. But none of that excused what she did. Cheating wasn't a symptom of a broken marriage, it was a choice. A selfish, cruel choice that shattered the trust we'd built over a decade. Still, I don't regret the time I spent with her. Those years weren't wasted, they were a part of my journey. They taught me about love, loyalty, and the importance of never settling for less than I deserve. And while it's painful to think about how it ended, I'm grateful for the lessons it taught me. A brighter future. It's been a year since the divorce, and I'm in a much better place now. I've started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but it's nice to feel excited about someone new. I've learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own happiness. And most importantly, I've learned that life goes on, even after the worst heartbreak. I don't think about Rachel much anymore. When I do, it's usually with a sense of pity rather than anger. She made her choices, and she has to live with them. As for me, I'm finally free to build the life I deserve, one filled with honesty, respect, and love. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, it gets better. It's not easy, and there will be days when it feels like the pain will never end. But it does, and when it does, you'll come out stronger, wiser, and ready for a fresh start. Thanks for reading, and if you're ever in a dark place, remember, you're not alone. There's always a way forward.